Thank you, Senator McEwen. Senator Ludlam.
Thanks, Mr Acting Deputy President. I'm pleased to speak today on the Renewable Energy Electricity Amendment Excessive Noise from Wind Farm Bills 2012. And the bill seeks to establish a definition of excessive noise for wind farms and the impact of noise on sleep and health. I won't go into— I think my colleague Senator Di Natale has canvassed with great sensitivity and coherence the way that you assess the way that people are experiencing health impacts far more coherently than I could. It's a shame Senator Edwards is leaving the chamber, because I did want to pick up on one of the issues that he mentioned. He's still here, which is excellent. The committee into this bill concluded that the bill is effectively discriminatory against one kind of power generator, that the bill won't prevent wind farms from operating, but it could in fact have an impact on electricity prices, and that the bill involves the Commonwealth taking over planning and regulatory responsibilities that, in my view, properly lie with the states. But the committee also concluded, and perhaps that's something that we can all agree on, although we will not be voting for this bill, that every resident, whether in a city and environment or in a rural area, should be protected from unreasonable environmental impacts by the operation of planning laws and guidelines. And obviously that applies to a much larger degree of industrial phenomenon than simply wind farms. It is an important principle, though, and I would like to acknowledge Senators Madigan and Xenophon for bringing that forward, apart from the rather peculiar way in which wind farms have been singled out in this bill. Now, when the committee held the hearing into the bill in November of last year, there were strong feelings from people who felt that they'd been negatively affected by wind farms. And I would just draw Senators' attention to the comments made by Senator and Dr Di Natale on that those people shouldn't be dismissed out of hand, because these symptoms are clearly real and people aren't making these things up. But how we attribute the cause is extremely important. Now, every large-scale industrial technology can be done badly. It can be done with poor consultation, and it can have negative impacts on people. And it is the case that wind farms have an impact. They're not invisible. They're large structures in the landscape. So there's a visual impact, there's a noise impact, and there do need to be clear regulations in place about how to manage those. Ironically enough, I've never heard anybody in the wind industry, who I do have good contacts with, disputing any of these things. So we should study the impacts, we should learn the lessons, we need to acknowledge what exists in the medical literature and what doesn't exist. And I think most importantly, from a perspective of the Greens, we need to learn how to improve consultation processes with affected communities, whether it's for a wind farm installation or anything else. The other thing, of course, from our perspective, elements of the placement of wind installations, if you put them across bird or bat flyways, you can have impacts on wildlife. And so the industry has already learned a great deal in the decades that it's been operating about how to place these installations well. So learning the lessons and improving processes and technology about this technology is extremely crucial to get right, because this industry has such a large and important part to play in the future of electricity generation here in Australia and around the world. We need to acknowledge another important report into wind farms that was tabled in June 2011 and chaired by my colleague Senator Rachel Seward, that again offered another careful consideration of these issues. So I'm canvassing this history in order to underline the point that we don't dismiss these issues out of hand, that I don't think wind farm developers should get a free run, should be able to circumvent proper community consultation, proper planning procedures, just because they're an industry I support. I think they should be held to the same standards of community engagement, public health and safety and planning guidelines as other things, as we are so dramatically failing to uphold in the instance of communities being overrun by the coal seam gas industry, the coal industry, and the uranium industry, just to name three examples that are close to my heart, where we see communities being assaulted effectively by invasive industrial processes that have very real and present health threats to existing communities. So the report that Senator Seward undertook also adopted, I think, quite a sensitive approach to people who had come forward expressing health concerns, and undertook a very rigorous analysis, in particular of the concerns around infrasound, because those issues, in my view, hadn't been canvassed particularly well in Australia before that inquiry was undertaken. So the Greens do take these issues seriously, but we also take the fortunes and the future of the wind energy industry very seriously because it is such an important part of our future. It has to be part of our future to mitigate the worst impacts of dangerous climate change. We already live in the age of climate change, and it is actually completely immaterial whether people like Tony Abbott, Mr Abbott and Senator Joyce believe it exists or not. It's occurring around them regardless, and they can choose to adopt a policy blindfold and stumble around in the dark. I would prefer that they didn't because of the harm that it threatens to the rest of us. But it's happening whether they believe it to be so or not. And as wind energy, as the most mature large-scale energy, renewable energy technology, where economies of scale have long been an important part of the reason why it's being built, does have a very important part to play in the energy mix here in Australia. We need a zero-emissions energy sector, and wind is clearly going to be a large part of that. And all of the studies which investigate how to achieve 100% renewable energy networks, including the one that Senators Milne and Brown and the member for Melbourne, Adam Bant, were able to incorporate in the negotiations into the Clean Energy Act, undertaking right now into what a 100% renewable energy sector for the national electricity market would look like. Wind is going to take up a large fraction of the heavy lifting because it's cheap, it can be installed very rapidly, the technology is mature, and I would like to see a greater degree of local content of manufacturing and fabrication here in Australia. And part of that is around the economics. Last week, my colleague Robin Chappell and myself launched Energy 2029, which is a study, a more fine-grained study than has yet occurred in Western Australia, for how you would get to 100% renewable energy on the South West Interconnected System, the SWIS, in WA. And in both of the scenarios that we had commissioned, wind took up a very large part of the heavy lifting for the reasons that I've expressed. As of February of this year, wind is now cheaper than fossil fuels in producing electricity in Australia. And the LC... Oh, Senator Boswell, just listen quietly and you may learn something. And I'll...
Order. Senator Boswell, please cease interjecting.
Thank you, Deputy President. You will have a chance to speak, Senator Boswell, and I'm so looking forward to hearing your contribution. Now, the LCOE calculations that appear to have completely baffled your colleague, Senator Edwards, is just a standard way of assessing one energy technology against another. If you're going to compare the lifetime capital and operating cost of an energy technology in a way that is fair, so you can compare the nuclear power station, coal, gas, and various forms of renewable energy technologies, new and mature, you need a metric like the levelised cost of electricity. Otherwise, you're not operating on a level playing field. It's a shame that Senator Edwards came in here expressing his bafflement at how these calculations are made, because they're entirely standard in the energy industry. What they tell us is that a new wind farm can supply electricity at a cost of $80 per megawatt hour, compared with 143 or 116 from a new coal or gas-fired power station. Senator Boswell, 80 is less than 143. So wind electricity is therefore
Boswell,
cheaper.
please.
Cheaper is the word that I will use than coal or gas. And both coal and gas technologies have important negative health consequences for the people living near them. Most of the focus has been on coal dust and the impacts of the coal industry, but I'd also invite senators to contemplate the plume of toxic organic chemicals that come from, for example, Woodside's gas plant on the Burrup Peninsula that then shrouds the populations of Karratha, Dampier and Roban. The gas industry has its health impacts as well, and they need to be called to account. Senator Edwards, which I found enormously amusing, blaming wind energy for increases in electricity cost in his home state of South Australia. I'm from WA, where because of blocking actions by the Barnett government, we haven't seen as great a deployment of wind energy as we have in South Australia. They're starting to get the picture, so we're seeing some installations, but SA nonetheless is still further ahead than we are. When you're calculating in a deregulated market like SA, the merit order effect of who shall we bring on because there's a supply gap, which generators can supply energy at the least cost, wind energy generators are generating electricity at night for an effective marginal cost of zero, of nothing, because once you have put the capital in, the energy of the wind is delivered for free. And so the Essential Service Commission of South Australia, the ECO-SA, which regulates retail electricity prices in South Australia, has recently released a draft price determination that proposes an 8.1% reduction. Senator Boswell, that is, the price is going down by 8.1% in the electricity standing offer because you have such a high degree of wind installation generating electricity effectively at a cost of nothing at all. And that ECOSA proposes is likely to translate to a reduction of $27 per megawatt hour. But what that means for the household is a fall in South Australian electricity bills by an average of $160 per household. Senator Boswell, that's prices going down, which is different to prices
Senator
going
Ludlam,
up.
I would ask you to talk through the chair, not directly to Senator Boswell,
Yeah,
and that may discourage
I might
him
need
from
your
interjecting.
assistance, Deputy President, in spelling it out for Senator Boswell, the difference between prices going down and prices going up. But we can dwell here further if you think that it would be useful to do so. Renewable energy is capital intensive and the costs are all up front, but your fuel costs are zero, and that goes for solar energy as well, which is why it is so exciting to see in Spain and in the United States and in other markets around the world the development of very large-scale, effectively better than baseload solar power stations. Senator Boswell, they had a housing bubble because of rampant speculation in the housing market. And thank goodness they have got out in front and developed a robust renewable energy technology sector, which we will shortly be importing componentry from because they got out in front. It's not too late for Australia to take a lead in this industry and in this sector. But attacking the wind industry in particular and singling them out, I would respectfully suggest to our coalition colleagues and to Senator Managan, is a rather poor way of doing that. Wind power has actually grown faster than the booming solar industry, but of course it had something of a head start. In 2008, installed wind power capacity rose by 30%, and it's the fastest growing type of new electricity generation. And that's why the contributions that you will hear from all Greens who will speak in this debate says that's why it's very important to get it right, to get the planning processes right, to make sure that communities don't feel that they're being cut out of the consultation processes if these things are going in their communities or close to their communities. Australia has currently 59 separate wind farms which consist of 1,345 individual turbines with 2,480 megawatts of capacity. So generally you wouldn't get that all at the same time, but that was if all of those wind farms are operating flat out at maximum output. 2.5 gigawatts nearly of electricity. That's the size of two large nuclear installations. This technology is mature and it does have a very big place in the Australian energy market. There are, I should acknowledge, currently over 14 gigawatts of large-scale wind farm energy projects proposed around the country. And one of the reasons that the industry is finally stepping up here is that we have got some of the policy settings right. We've got a renewable energy target that was, I acknowledged, introduced by the Howard government. Senator Boswell, some of your colleagues. It was 2% originally, Senator Boswell. I was around and we thought at the time, well, a 98% fossil-fired renewable energy target is interesting, but we'll start with the 2%. And of course, partly because of rapid advances in the wind industry, that target was met years before schedule. It was ramped up to 10, it was ramped up to 20, and now, of course, we're seeing, not because this technology is flaky and not because this technology is expensive, but because it is so successful, we are seeing coordinated attacks by fossil incumbents on the wind energy sector. Now, I don't believe for a moment that the individuals presenting with health concerns at these public meetings or the people who fronted Senate inquiries are part of some grand anti-wind conspiracy. But let's not deny that renewable energy technology, capital intensive but having zero fuel costs, is a very, very effective competitor to fossil fuels. And it has got the incumbents extremely worried, and they are doing everything they can to shut these competitors out. Now, perhaps from a purely commercial point of view, you might say that's their right as energy incumbents to protect their investment. The Greens believe there is a public health and an urgent social, economic and environmental imperative to ramp up the output of renewable energy generators across the board. It doesn't mean we cut regulatory corners, it doesn't mean we put communities at risk, but the urgency cannot be understated for ramping this technology up, whether it be mature technologies like wind or encouraging the next generation like concentrated solar thermal plants. The need is absolutely urgent. Just to give a sense, though, of the importance of the wind industry within this debate, in my home state of Western Australia, the Southwest Interconnected System, the SWIS, which stretches effectively from Geraldton through Kalgoorlie to Albany and takes in the big generators in Collie and Kwinana, of the small fraction of renewable energy on that grid, which is about 50% of the electricity consumed in WA, 75% of the renewable energy on that grid is generated by wind farms. And three of the largest ones, Colgar at Merredin, Walkaway at Geraldton and Emu Downs at Badgingarra, are very large utility scale plants making a large contribution. It's not going to be enough, and we believe that the wind energy industry has a big future in WA as it does elsewhere, because we want to see the same effects that we've seen in South Australia, where the large-scale deployment of this technology is seeing wholesale electricity prices falling. And so all I would ask for the coalition is that you are entitled to your own opinions, and it's good, and that's why we assemble in this parliament, to have a clash of opinions. But can you at least not invent your own facts and make things up, which Senator Edwards was doing before, insisting that wind energy has pushed prices up, when the South Australian electricity regulator is telling us it's pushing prices down. And we know to a decimal place how far it's pushing prices down. I want to underline the idea that we start now in a serious way to roll out the next generation of renewable energy infrastructure, which once it's built requires maintenance but no fuel. And that is what will ultimately push electricity prices down, when we get efficient about how we use electricity and stop wasting so much of it, and when we finally have a large amount of infrastructure in the ground that effectively has zero fuel costs. That's when we really start to see electricity prices coming down. We don't believe that this bill provides the best way forward, although I think all of us who've contributed have acknowledged the motives of Senator Madigan in bringing it forward as being to give some voice to people who've expressed with genuine health concerns. And all I can really do by way of comfort to Senator Madigan is call your attention to the way Senator Di Natale, on behalf of the Australian Greens, spelt out that these people do need to be heard, they do need to be given a voice to have their legitimate concerns aired. But let's have a look at the cause and effect relationship of exactly what it is that is giving rise to these concerns in the first place. And if we can, in a fairly clear-headed way, look at somewhere like Denmark, where they are world leaders in wind energy technology. They have huge onshore and offshore installations. They have buffer zones. They don't have people living right underneath the turbines for perfectly good reasons. And they have zero incidence of the kind of health effects that some from the margins are claiming are causing these impacts that are being reported to Senate inquiries and through various other processes. The Greens will stand with the wind energy industry. It has a huge part to play in energy policy here in Australia. We won't be giving them free rides. We won't be enabling cutting of corners, regulatory or consultative. But let's at least try and work from an acknowledged body of facts in this debate, because to do any less than that, I think, really is to let down the constituents who spoke to Senator Seward, who have spoken to Senator Madigan, expressing these health concerns, so that we can actually collectively take the urgent actions that are required of this present generation to rapidly expand the installation and deployment of renewable energy in this country.